blood, wet earth, and the unmistakable intoxicating scent of a human. The forbidden sanctuary of St. Jude had been sealed for 3 centuries, a cursed, overgrown ruin where even the bravest Lycans dared not tread. Yet King Cedric stood at its crumbling iron gates, his golden eyes fixed on the shadows within. He expected to find a foolish poacher or a desperate assassin sent by rival territories. What he found instead would shatter the very foundations of his reign. Curled in the heart of the decaying altar was a fragile human woman, and pressed against her chest, glowing with an impossible, ethereal light, was the sacred silver pup. The midnight fog clung to the ancient pines of the Blackwood territory like a burial shroud. It was the 15th century, an era where the lines between myth and history were blurred by blood and iron. King Cedric, the ruthless sovereign of the northern Lycan courts, moved through the dense forest with a predatory silence that belied his massive, battle-scarred frame. Tonight was the night of the blood moon, a sacred time when the alpha's senses were at their absolute peak, tuned to the heartbeat of every living creature within a 10-mile radius. Normally, Cedric would be holding court at the obsidian throne of Castle Blackwood, surrounded by his loyal general's men, like Arthur Pendleton and Gregory Finch. But a disturbance had pulled him from the great hall. A scent. It was faint at first, carried on the bitter autumn wind that swept down from the jagged peaks of the Worm-Tooth Mountains. It was a chaotic mingling of sharp iron, crushed damp lilac, and salt. Human tears. Cedric's jaw tightened, his elongated canines pressing into his lower lip. A human in his territory was a violation of the Treaty of Lancaster, an ancient pact forged 50 years prior by his grandfather. Humans kept to the sunlit valleys of the south, paying tithes in livestock and grain, and in return the wolves did not hunt them. But this scent was not just on the borders, it was deep within the heart of the woods. It was coming from the forbidden sanctuary of St. Jude. The sanctuary was a place of dark legends. 300 years ago, it had been a human monastery before the first Great Lycan War. A massacre had occurred there, staining the stone floors so deeply with blood that nothing but poisonous nightshade grew within its walls. It was said to be haunted by the restless spirits of both species. No wolf set foot past its rusted, wrought-iron gates. To do so was to invite a curse upon one's bloodline. Yet as Cedric stood before the towering vine-choked gates, the scent of the human grew overwhelmingly rich. It pulled at the beast within him, demanding blood, demanding answers. He pushed against the rusted iron. The gates gave way with a mournful shriek that echoed through the dead, silent trees. Cedric stepped onto the cursed ground, his boots crushing ancient moss-covered cobblestones. The air inside the sanctuary was suffocatingly still. The roof of the old cathedral had long since caved in, allowing the pale silver light of the blood moon to illuminate the ruined nave. He moved like a shadow, his golden eyes scanning the debris. Broken statues of forgotten saints stared down at him with weeping, mossy eyes. The scent of lilac and terror was so thick now he could taste it on the back of his tongue. He stalked toward the high altar, his muscles coiling, ready to strike down the trespasser. Then he heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound. It wasn't the frantic gasping of a cornered thief. It was a hushed, soothing hum, a lullaby. Cedric rounded the crumbling marble of the altar and froze. The breath was knocked from his lungs not by an enemy blade, but by the sheer impossibility of the sight before him. Sitting in the dust, her modest wool dress torn and stained with dark mud, was a human woman. Her dark auburn hair tumbled in wild disarray over her shoulders, framing a face pale with cold and exhaustion. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, but her eyes held a fierce, desperate gravity. She did not scream when the massive, shadowed figure of the Lycan King stepped into her view. Instead, she curled her body inward, curling protectively over a bundle of blood-stained linen in her lap. "How did you bypass the border patrols?" Cedric's voice was a deep, guttural rumble that vibrated through the very stones of the sanctuary. "Speak human, before I tear the throat from your neck." The woman Rachel Hayes trembled, but she did not look away. "I did not come to steal," she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the violent shaking of her hands. "I was chased. Men from the village of Oakhaven, Lord Harrington's tax collectors. They meant to take me to the workhouses. I ran into the woods. I didn't know where I was going. You trespass on sacred Lycan ground." Cedric snarled, stepping closer, the beast beneath his skin surging at the proximity of fragile prey. "Your lord's quarrels are not my concern. Your life is forfeit." He raised a massive, clawed hand, the shadows elongating his terrifying silhouette against the cathedral walls. But as he prepared to strike, the bundle in Rachel's arms shifted. A small, pitiful whine pierced the heavy silence. Cedric stopped, his golden eyes narrowing. "What is that?" Rachel tightened her grip, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "Please," she begged, abandoning her brave facade. "Kill me if you must, but spare him. I found his mother dying in the thorn bushes just outside these walls. She pushed him toward me before she took her last breath." Carefully, with agonizing slowness, Rachel folded back the edge of the linen. Cedric's heart stopped. The beast within him let out a deafening, reverent howl of pure shock. Resting in the cradle of the human's arms was a pup. But it was not just any pup. Even in the dim moonlight, its fur shimmered with an undeniable, blinding luminescence. It was pure liquid silver. Its tiny blind eyes were sealed shut, but the raw, crackling aura of ancient power radiating from its fragile body was unmistakable. It was an argentum, the sacred silver pup. A creature of pure myth, prophesied to appear only when the Lycan race was on the brink of total extinction, a time that was dangerously approaching, as the females of Cedric's pack had not borne a surviving child in nearly a decade. And the human was holding it. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Cedric stared at the tiny, glowing creature, his mind reeling. The legends spoke of the silver wolf, a divine emissary granted by the moon goddess to lead the packs into an era of unparalleled prosperity. The last recorded existence of an argentum was over a millennia ago, yet here it was, a tangible miracle, breathing softly against the rough wool of a human peasant's dress. "Give him to me," Cedric commanded, his voice dropping an octave, filled with an ancient instinctual authority. He stepped forward, his massive frame dwarfing the human woman. Rachel instinctively scrambled backward, her back hitting the cold, damp stone of the altar. "No, he's freezing. He needs milk." He needs warmth. He belongs to my kind. Cedric roared, his control slipping. The muscles in his back rippled violently as his bones threatened to break and reform into his lycanthrope state. You are a filthy, trespassing human. You soil him with your touch. He lunged, grabbing Rachel by the wrist with bone-crushing force. He intended to rip the child from her arms and snap her neck in one fluid motion. But the moment his hand clamped over her delicate wrist, an explosive shockwave of energy blasted through the sanctuary. It wasn't physical force that threw Cedric back, but a searing, blinding surge of raw magic. He staggered, releasing her, his boots skidding against the cobblestones. He looked down at his hand, astonished. It was smoking.
Rachel sat frozen, equally terrified, staring at the pup. The tiny silver creature had let out a surprisingly loud, sharp bark, and a faint silvery barrier had pulsed outward from its small body encompassing Rachel. A bond Cedric realized, his mind struggling to process the impossible. The sacred pup had imprinted on the human. I didn't do anything. Rachel stammered, her eyes wide with fresh panic as she looked at the towering, furious king. I swear it. I just tried to keep him warm.
Cedric's chest heaved. The situation was catastrophic. The law of his people was absolute. Humans discovered in Lycan territory were to be executed to protect the secrecy of their strongholds. But the Argentum had chosen her. If Cedric killed her now, the shock to the pup's newly formed magical bond could be fatal. The hope of his entire dying race rested in the fragile, glowing bundle in her arms. "Who are you?" Cedric demanded, his tone icy, calculating. Rachel Hayes. I am a healer from Oakhaven." "A healer," Cedric scoffed bitterly. "You dabble in crushed roots and leeches. You know nothing of what you hold." "I know he is starving." Rachel fired back, a sudden spark of maternal defiance cutting through her terror. "I know that if you leave him out here in the cold, or if you rip him away from the only warmth he's known since his mother died, he will perish. King or not, you cannot command death to stay away." Cedric's eyes flashed with dangerous warning, but he recognized the truth in her words. The pup was shivering, its silver glow dimming slightly as the cold autumn air leached its strength. "Stand up," Cedric ordered. He shrugged off his heavy fur-lined velvet cloak, a garment worth more than Rachel's entire village, and tossed it at her. "Wrap him in that. Keep him hidden. If he makes a sound, I will end you myself." Rachel didn't hesitate. She caught the heavy cloak, instantly enveloped in the intense, spicy scent of pine musk and danger that radiated from the Lycan King. She carefully bundled the pup, hiding its luminescent fur completely, and draped the rest of the massive cloak over her own freezing shoulders. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice trembling as she struggled to her feet. "To Ironhold," Cedric replied, turning his back on her and marching toward the ruined gates. "And listen to me carefully, Rachel Hayes. From this moment on, you are not a healer. You are my prisoner, my slave. You do exactly as I say, you speak to no one, and you never, under penalty of a death so slow, you will beg for the end reveal what you are carrying to anyone in my court. Do you understand why?" she asked, hurrying to keep pace with his massive strides. "Is he not a miracle for your people?" Cedric stopped so abruptly that Rachel nearly collided with his broad back. He turned, looking down at her, his golden eyes shadowed with a profound, terrifying darkness. A miracle is a dangerous thing in a court of starving wolves, human. There are those in my inner circle who would see this pup slaughtered to ensure the throne falls to their bloodline when my reign ends. If they discover his existence before he is strong enough to defend himself, they will kill him, and they will tear you apart simply for the sport of it. Rachel swallowed hard, clutching the sleeping bundle tighter to her chest. She had fled the cruelty of human men only to be dragged into a den of literal monsters. But as she felt the tiny, steady heartbeat against her own, a fierce, protective resolve settled over her. "I won't let them," she whispered. Cedric looked at her, a fleeting expression of surprise crossing his hardened features before the mask of the ruthless king slammed back into place. "See that you don't. Move." The fortress of Ironhold was a brutalist masterpiece of black stone and iron spikes carved directly into the side of the Worm-Tooth Mountains. As Cedric rode through the heavy portcullis on his massive black warhorse, with Rachel seated uncomfortably behind him, the sheer scale of the Lycan stronghold stole the breath from her lungs. Hundreds of Lycans moved through the torchlit courtyards. Some were in human form, sharpening weapons or tending to massive forges that spewed orange sparks into the night sky. Others remained in their beast forms, hulking, terrifying wolves, the size of ponies, pacing the battlements with glowing eyes. Rachel kept her head bowed, the heavy folds of Cedric's cloak obscuring her face and the precious bundle clutched to her stomach. She could feel the predatory gaze of 100 wolves snapping toward them as they entered. The scent of a human was an anomaly here, an intoxicating provocation. Cedric dismounted in the central courtyard, his presence demanding instant, absolute silence. He reached up and hauled Rachel down by her arm, keeping her close to his side. "My king." A voice slithered through the quiet courtyard. Stepping from the shadows of the great hall was Lord Alaric Montgomery. He was Cedric's beta, the second in command of the Blackwood pack. Unlike Cedric's imposing, broad-shouldered warrior physique, Alaric was lean, elegant, and dangerously aristocratic. His silver blonde hair was pulled back perfectly, and his pale blue eyes missed nothing. "You return from the hunt." Alaric noted his eyes drifting lazily to the shivering figure of Rachel. "And it seems you have caught a rather unusual prey. A human and a female at that. I thought we agreed that bringing their kind across our borders was a violation of the old laws." Cedric's grip on Rachel's arm tightened slightly, a silent warning. "She is not prey, Alaric. She is a spoil of the border. I caught her spying near the ruins of St. Jude. She will serve as a thrall in my personal chambers." A low murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. The king taking a human thrall into his private quarters. It was unheard of. It was scandalous. Alaric's smile did not reach his cold eyes. A thrall. How quaint. But surely, my liege, the dungeons would be a more suitable place for a spy. Allow me to interrogate her. I have a talent for extracting the truth from fragile human minds. She is mine to question. Cedric snapped, his voice echoing off the stone walls, infused with a dominating alpha tone that made several lesser wolves in the courtyard instinctively bare their necks in submission. Your duties lie with the Western Border Patrol's Lord Montgomery. See to them. Alaric bowed deeply, though the gesture mocked more than it respected. As you command, my king. As Cedric pulled Rachel toward the heavy oak doors of the royal keep, Alaric's gaze lingered on the heavy bulge beneath the king's cloak that Rachel so desperately clutched. His nostrils flared, taking in the scent of the human lilac sweat terror. But beneath it all, masked almost entirely by the overpowering scent of Cedric's alpha musk on the cloak, was something else. A faint, ozone-sharp scent of pure magic. Alaric's eyes narrowed into slits as the heavy doors slammed shut behind the king. Inside the king's chambers, the oppressive danger of the courtyard faded into a stifling, heavy luxury. The room was massive, dominated by a massive hearth where a roaring fire fought back the mountain chill. Tapestries of legendary wolf hunts lined the walls, and a massive bed, draped in dark furs, sat in the center of the room. Cedric locked the heavy iron-reinforced door and turned to Rachel. Put him by the fire. Rachel hurried to the hearth, gently placing the bundle onto a thick bearskin rug. She pulled back the cloak. The silver pup whimpered its glow, illuminating the stone floor. It was weak, its sides heaving. He needs food, Rachel said, looking up at Cedric. Her fear of the man momentarily eclipsed by her fear for the creature. Now, Cedric moved to a heavy wooden table and poured a goblet full of thick, rich goat's milk, intended for his own meal. He brought it over, kneeling beside the human. Dip your fingers, he instructed quietly. Let him suckle. Rachel did as she was told. The pup eagerly latched onto her fingers, the warm milk providing instant relief. For a moment, the brutal Lycan King and the desperate human healer knelt side by side, united in the delicate task of keeping a myth alive. You lied to him, Rachel whispered, breaking the silence. To Lord Montgomery. Why? Cedric stared at the fire, the dancing flames reflecting in his golden eyes. Alaric is from the house of Montgomery. They have long believed that my bloodline is cursed, that my inability to sire an heir proves the moon goddess has abandoned the Blackwoods. He has been quietly gathering support among the outer packs. If he discovers the Argentum, he will kill the pup and claim it was a stillborn, using the tragedy to finally dethrone me. Rachel shivered. Then why keep me alive? I am a liability. Cedric finally looked at her, his gaze intense and unreadable. He reached out his massive, calloused thumb, brushing a smudge of dirt from her cheek. The gentleness of the gesture was so at odds with his violent nature that Rachel froze. Because Rachel Hayes. Cedric murmured, the pup's magic bonded to you. If you die, the shock will kill him. My fate, my throne, and the survival of my entire race is now irrevocably tied to the beating of your human heart. A sudden sharp knock echoed at the chamber door, shattering the quiet intimacy. My king, came the voice of Thomas Wright, the captain of the King's Guard. Forgive the intrusion, but Lord Montgomery has called an emergency conclave of the Alpha Council. He claims to have found evidence of treason. Cedric's eyes darkened with instant fury. He looked at Rachel, then at the glowing silver pup. The game of survival had just begun, and the stakes were higher than blood. Hide. Cedric commanded, his voice a razor-sharp whisper that sliced through the tension in the room. He moved with terrifying speed, crossing the massive chamber and pressing a hidden sequence into the stonework surrounding the great hearth. With a heavy grating sound, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a pitch-black alcove designed for royal emergencies. Rachel did not waste a breath arguing. She gathered the sleeping silver pup, wrapping him tightly in the heavy fur cloak, and scrambled into the dark, narrow space. "Do not make a sound, no matter what you hear," Cedric instructed, his golden eyes locking onto hers. The raw, predatory intensity in his gaze made her heart skip a chaotic beat. "If I do not return by dawn, there is a tunnel at the back of this vault. It leads down into the Wormtooth mines. Run, Rachel. Run. And never look back." Before she could respond, he slammed the stone door shut, plunging her into absolute darkness. Cedric smoothed his features, forcing the beast beneath his skin into cold, calculating submission. He unlocked his chamber doors to find Thomas Wright waiting in the torchlit corridor, flanked by 4 heavily armored Lycan guards. "Lead the way, Captain," Cedric said smoothly. The great hall of Ironhold was a cavernous space of vaulted ceilings and iron chandeliers built to accommodate the massive forms of shifted wolves. Tonight, however, the Alpha Council remained in their human shapes, though the air was thick with the suffocating scent of aggression and nervous sweat. The 12 elders sat in a semicircle of carved obsidian chairs. In the center of the room stood Lord Alaric Montgomery, holding a scroll of parchment and wearing a smile that resembled a drawn blade. "My king," Alaric purred as Cedric strode to the head of the hall. He did not bow. "We apologize for the ungodly hour, but treason does not sleep, and therefore neither can justice." "Speak your peace, Alaric," Cedric demanded, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "And it had best be profound." "You have interrupted my rest." Alaric paced the stone floor. "Earlier tonight, you brought a human female into our sacred stronghold. You claimed she was a mere border spy destined to be a thrall. But I found her scent intriguing. So I took the liberty of sending a swift-footed scout to the human village of Oakhaven, where she originates." Cedric's blood ran cold, though his face remained a mask of stone. Crossing the border to investigate a human was a direct violation of protocol. "It seems our beloved king has lied to the council," Alaric announced, turning to the elders. "The human is no mere peasant. She is a convicted witch, wanted by the local human magistrate, Lord Harrington, for the foul murder of livestock and the cursing of crops." Murmurs of outrage rippled through the elders. Witchcraft was an ancient, bitter enemy of the Lycan race. Magic that did not stem from the moon goddess was considered a rot that could infect a pack's bloodline. "You harbor a poisoner in the royal chambers, Cedric," Alaric accused, his voice rising to a theatrical crescendo. "A creature whose very presence defies the Treaty of Lancaster and endangers us all. Why has the king been ensnared by human hexes, or is he actively working to weaken the Blackwood pack from within?" "Careful, Alaric." Cedric growled a low, vibrating sound that made the iron chandeliers rattle above them. "Your tongue wags dangerously close to your own execution." "I have proof," Alaric countered, gesturing toward the heavy oak doors at the far end of the hall. "Bring him in." The doors groaned open, and two Lycan guards dragged a terrified, sweating human man into the hall. He was draped in fine, albeit rumpled, velvet clothing. It was Lord Harrington himself. The human noble fell to his knees, trembling violently, as he found himself surrounded by monsters of myth. "Tell them," Alaric barked, kicking the human's leg. "She is a witch," Harrington stammered, staring at the floor, too terrified to look at Cedric. "Rachel Hayes. She works with roots and dark incantations. She stole something from my estate, a sacred relic glowing with devilish light. I demand her return, and the return of my property, lest the king's army march upon these woods." Cedric's mind raced. Harrington had no idea what the relic truly was. He had likely only seen the silver glow of the pup when Rachel fled. But Alaric was brilliant, twisting human ignorance into a weapon. By bringing Harrington here, Alaric had simultaneously framed Rachel as a dangerous witch and accused Cedric of theft that could incite a human war. You brought a human lord into Ironhold. Elder Silas, a grizzled, scarred wolf, stood up, slamming his fist on his armrest. "Alaric, this is madness. You have broken the treaty yourself by kidnapping a noble." "I brought a witness," Alaric shouted back, "to expose a king unfit to rule." As the hall erupted into shouting, Cedric's heightened hearing caught a sound that chilled him to the marrow. It wasn't in the hall. It was a distant, muffled crash. It came from the direction of the royal chambers. Alaric hadn't just called the conclave to depose him. It was a distraction. While Cedric was trapped in a political crossfire, Alaric's assassins were already moving in on the prize. In the pitch-black vault, Rachel squeezed her eyes shut, trying to slow her panicked breathing. The silver pup in her arms whimpered softly, its luminescence casting faint, ghostly shadows on the rough-hewn stone walls. Crash! The heavy iron-reinforced door to the royal chambers splintered. Rachel clamped a hand over her mouth. Through the thick stone of the hidden door, she could hear the heavy booted footsteps of someone stalking into the room. "Find her," a coarse voice ordered. Alaric said the scent of magic would be heavy. "Tear the room apart if you must. Just find the human." There were two of them. Rachel heard the violent tearing of the velvet bed curtains, the shattering of pottery, and the heavy thud of overturned furniture. They were systematically dismantling the king's sanctuary. Then the footsteps stopped, right in front of the hearth. "Gideon," the coarse voice said, a cruel note of triumph bleeding into the words. "The scent of lilac. It leads right into this wall." Rachel's blood turned to ice. She backed away, her shoulders hitting the cold, damp stone of the rear wall. She felt blindly for the tunnel Cedric had mentioned, her fingers scraping against loose earth and jagged rock. She found the opening, a narrow, sloping shaft plunging deep into the mountain. "Stand back," Gideon ordered outside the wall. A deafening crack echoed through the vault as a massive warhammer smashed into the secret stone door. Dust showered down on Rachel's hair. The pup in her arms began to squirm violently, letting out a sharp, distressed yip. "Hush, little one, please." Rachel prayed, tears tracking through the dirt on her cheeks. Another brutal strike. The stone fractured. Moonlight bled into the dark vault through the fresh crack. Rachel didn't wait. Shielding the pup with her body, she turned and slid into the dark, descending tunnel. It was steep, the ground slick with ancient condensation. She slipped, tumbling backward, scraping her knees and elbows raw against the unforgiving rock, but she refused to let go of the bundle. Behind her, the stone door exploded inward. "She's in the chute. Get her!" Rachel scrambled to her feet, running blindly into the crushing darkness of the Wormtooth mines. The air grew stale, heavy, with the smell of iron ore and decay. The heavy thundering footfalls of the Lycan assassins echoed monstrously behind her. They were gaining. A human could never outrun a wolf in the dark. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up into a massive, cavernous gorge. A rickety wooden bridge spanned a terrifying, bottomless chasm leading to another set of tunnels on the far side. Rachel sprinted onto the bridge. The ancient wood groaned and cracked under her weight. She was halfway across when a massive, hairy hand clamped down on her ankle. She screamed as she was violently yanked backward, hitting the wooden planks with a bone-jarring thud. Gideon fully shifted into his monstrous, towering wolf form loomed over her. His eyes were pits of glowing crimson saliva dripping from his massive jaws. "Got you, little witch." The beast snarled, his voice a horrifying, distorted rumble. He reached for the bundle in her arms. "No!" Rachel screamed, fueled by a surge of pure motherly adrenaline. She kicked out violently, her boot connecting with the beast's snout, but it was like kicking a solid oak tree. Gideon's claws ripped through the heavy fur cloak, exposing the silver pup. For a fraction of a second, the assassin froze, completely blinded by the radiant holy light spilling from the tiny creature. It was a sight no living Lycan had ever witnessed. In that momentary hesitation, the pup opened its eyes. They were not blind. They were pools of liquid, glowing starlight. The pup let out a sound, not a bark, but a resonant, harmonic hum that vibrated the very air. The silver barrier that had protected Rachel in the sanctuary violently exploded outward. The shockwave of pure lunar magic slammed into Gideon like a battering ram. The massive wolf was lifted entirely off his feet, launched backward through the air. He hit the stone wall of the cavern with a sickening crunch and fell motionless into the abyss below. The second assassin, rushing out onto the bridge, skidded to a halt, staring in absolute terror at the glowing human and the divine creature in her arms. Before the second assassin could turn to flee, a shadow descended from the roof of the cavern. It was Cedric. He didn't bother shifting. In his human form, he dropped onto the bridge with earth-shattering force. His face was twisted into a mask of unparalleled demonic fury. He grabbed the remaining assassin by the throat, lifting the 300-pound man off the ground with a single arm. "Who sent you?" Cedric roared. Alaric." The man choked out his legs, kicking over the chasm. He knew she had something powerful. We were to kill her and bring it to him. Cedric's golden eyes burned like suns. Without another word, he crushed the assassin's windpipe and tossed the body into the dark gorge. Breathing heavily, his chest heaving, the king turned to Rachel. She was curled on the bridge, shaking uncontrollably, her arms wrapped tightly around the glowing pup. Her dress was torn, her skin bleeding, but she was alive. Cedric dropped to his knees beside her. He reached out his hands, remarkably gentle, and pulled her into his chest. The smell of his pine and musk engulfed her, anchoring her terrified mind. "You're safe," he whispered fiercely into her hair, a strange, profound tightness gripping his chest as he felt her heartbeat against his. He had never feared for another living soul, but the thought of losing this fragile human had nearly driven him mad. "They know," Rachel sobbed, clutching the front of his tunic. "Alaric knows we have something. Then Ironhold is no longer safe," Cedric stated, his voice hardening with absolute resolve. He looked down at the silver pup, whose glow was slowly fading back to a soft shimmer safely nestled between them. "Where will we go?" she asked, looking up at him. Cedric stood, pulling her up with him, never letting go of her hand. "Beyond the mountains, to the sanctuary of the first pack. It is a suicide journey, an unforgiving wasteland where only the oldest magics survive." He looked back toward the tunnel that led up to his usurped throne. "But Alaric Montgomery has just started a war he cannot possibly comprehend, and I will burn this entire kingdom to ash before I let him touch you or the child." The journey beyond the Wormtooth Mountains was a descent into a frozen hell. For 3 days and 3 nights, King Cedric and Rachel traversed the glacial spine, a jagged expanse of ice, an unforgiving wind, where the air itself felt like shattered glass against the skin. Cedric had stripped the armor from a fallen guard before they left the mines, but the cold was still absolute. To keep Rachel alive, he carried her for hours at a time, wrapping her and the silver pup inside the heavy folds of a stolen bearskin, pressing her directly against his burning, lycanthropic body heat. "Drink," Cedric murmured, his voice hoarse from the freezing wind. They had taken shelter in a shallow ice cave as a blinding blizzard raged outside. He handed her a leather water skin he had warmed against his chest. Rachel took it with trembling, frostbitten fingers. She was exhausted, her lips pale and cracked, but her eyes remained fiercely alight. She drank the tepid water, then carefully trickled a few drops into the mouth of the silver pup. The creature whom Rachel had quietly begun calling Sterling was growing at an impossible magical rate. Already his silver fur was thick and plush, and his luminescent eyes watched Cedric with an eerie, ancient intelligence. "He is getting heavier," Rachel whispered, brushing a dirt-stained hand over the pup's radiant head. The gentle thrum of magic beneath her fingertips warmed her freezing blood. "How far is this first sanctuary?" "A day's ride if we had horses," Cedric replied, sitting heavily beside her. The flickering light of a small, desperately built fire illuminated the harsh angles of his face. He looked ragged. The flawless, terrifying king of Ironhold was gone, replaced by a desperate protector. "On foot in this storm. 2 days. If Alaric's hunters do not find us first." Rachel looked at him, truly, looked at him for the first time without the veil of absolute terror. She saw the deep purple bruising along his jaw where he had fought his way out of the keep, and the dried blood cracking on his leather tunic. "Why do you protect me?" she asked softly. "You said my death would kill the pup, but out here in this wasteland, I am slowing you down. You could have taken him, bound his magic somehow, and left me to the humans." Cedric's golden eyes snapped to hers, flashing with a sudden, intense heat that had nothing to do with the fire. He shifted closer, his massive frame dominating the small cavern. The scent of pine and heavy musk wrapped around her, drowning out the smell of the damp earth. "You think this is purely about the pup?" Cedric's voice was a dangerous velvet rumble. He reached out his large, calloused fingers, gently tracing the line of her jaw. The touch sent a violent shiver down Rachel's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "When Gideon tore you from the bridge, when I saw you falling into the dark, the beast within me did not scream for the Argentum Rachel. It screamed for you." Rachel's breath hitched. In the lore of her village, Lycans were soulless beasts of slaughter. Yet here was a king admitting a vulnerability that stripped away centuries of prejudice. "Lycans, we do not love as humans do." Cedric confessed, his thumb brushing over her lower lip. "We have mates, souls carved from the same starlight by the moon goddess, destined to rule together. I thought I had been forsaken, cursed, to lead my people alone until my bloodline withered." He leaned in his forehead, resting gently against hers. The heat radiating from him was intoxicating. "You smell of lilac iron and defiance. You survived the wrath of Lord Harrington, a man known even in human courts for his unparalleled cruelty, and you defied a Lycan King to protect a creature you did not understand. You are not a burden, Rachel Hayes. You are my salvation." Before Rachel could reply, a sound pierced the howling wind outside. It was a long, low horn blast, followed by the terrifying, chaotic howling of a hunting pack. Cedric pulled away his expression, instantly hardening into a mask of pure, lethal violence. "The bloodhounds," he snarled. "Alaric's elite trackers. They have found our scent." He stood kicking snow over the small fire, plunging them into the dim, icy blue light of the storm. "Stay behind me. No matter what happens, do not let go of Sterling." 4 massive wolves, easily twice the size of normal timber wolves, stalked into the mouth of the cavern. Their fur was matted with ice and blood, their eyes glowing with sadistic hunger. Leading them was a Lycan in half-shifted form, a monstrous hybrid of man and beast, holding a heavy iron broadsword. It was Kael Alaric's most ruthless executioner, a tragic end to a noble king. Kael sneered, his voice a guttural rasp. "Alaric sends his regards, Cedric. Hand over the human witch and the glowing rat, and I will grant you a swift death. Refuse, and we will feast on her while you watch." Cedric didn't speak. He roared. The sound shattered the ice hanging from the cavern roof. In a blur of motion, Cedric's bones cracked and reformed. He did not take a half form. He shifted entirely into the monstrous legendary alpha wolf of the Blackwood line, a beast of pure obsidian fur, standing nearly 7 feet tall at the shoulder. He launched himself at the bloodhounds. The cavern erupted into a whirlwind of violence. Cedric's jaws clamped onto the throat of the first wolf, snapping its neck with a sickening crunch. He threw the massive body into 2 others, knocking them back into the blizzard. Rachel pressed herself against the back of the cave, shielding Sterling with her body. She watched in horrified awe as Cedric fought with a brutal, divine grace. He was a god of war, tearing through Alaric's elite guard with savage efficiency. But there were too many. Kael seized an opening, driving his iron broadsword deep into Cedric's flank. Cedric howled in agony, his massive body faltering. Blood, thick and black, in the dim light sprayed across the ice. He turned and caught Kale's arm in his jaws, crushing the bone, but two other wolves piled onto his back, sinking their teeth into his shoulders. "No," Rachel screamed. She didn't think. The maternal protective instinct that had saved Sterling now extended to the man who was bleeding for her. Rachel scrambled forward, grabbing a discarded iron dagger from the fallen executioner. As she moved, Sterling leapt from her arms. The silver pup let out a deafening harmonic howl that echoed not just in the cavern, but in the minds of every living creature within 100 miles. A blinding pillar of silver light erupted from the pup, engulfing Rachel. She felt an ancient burning power surge through her veins. The magic of the Argentum bonded to her human soul, weaponized her very presence. She thrust her hand forward. A shockwave of pure kinetic moonlight blasted from her palm, striking the wolves, pinning Cedric. They were thrown violently out of the cave, their bodies smoking and burned by the sacred light. Cedric collapsed back into his human form, gasping for air, clutching his bleeding side. Rachel rushed to him, dropping to her knees. Her hands were glowing with the same silver light as the pup. "Let me," she commanded, pressing her glowing hands against his grievous wound. The magic flowed from her, knitting the torn flesh and shattered muscle back together. In seconds, Cedric stared up at her, utterly bewildered. You channel his power. We are bonded," Rachel said, tears of relief falling onto his chest as the wound closed completely. "And so are we." The sanctuary of the first pack was not the decaying ruin Rachel had expected. Instead, it was a massive hidden amphitheater carved directly into the caldera of a dormant volcano. The air here was warm, smelling of ancient earth and ozone, a stark contrast to the frozen wasteland they had just survived. Along the sheer obsidian walls, ancient runes pulsed with a soft, bioluminescent blue light, mimicking the heartbeat of the mountain itself. It was here, the oldest legends claimed, that the moon goddess first descended from the heavens to gift the wolf spirit to man. Cedric, Rachel, and Sterling stood at the center of the great stone altar, catching their breath in the echoing silence. The silver pup was a pup no longer. In mere days, the raw magic of his lineage had spurred an impossible growth. Now, the size of a fully grown mastiff, Sterling sat proudly at Rachel's side, his thick silver fur radiating a comforting sun-like warmth. Rachel rested her hand between his ears, feeling the steady thrum of power that connected her human soul to his divine one. But Cedric did not relax. His broad shoulders were tense, his golden eyes fixed on the entrance. He knew the quiet was an illusion. The peace of the sacred ground was violently shattered. With a deafening crash that shook dust from the cavern roof, the heavy iron-bound doors of the caldera buckled and exploded inward. The sound of marching boots and clicking claws filled the amphitheater. Thousands of soldiers poured into the sanctuary like a dark tide. Half of them were Lycan warriors, loyal to Alaric, fully shifted into massive snarling beasts, their eyes glowing with unnatural, bloodthirsty red light. The other half were human mercenaries, heavily armored in the silver and blue heraldry of Lord Harrington. They moved in disciplined ranks, armed with heavy crossbows, loaded with lethal silver-tipped bolts. At the vanguard of the army walked Alaric Montgomery, a sickeningly triumphant smile twisting his aristocratic features. Beside him, looking both terrified and greedy, sneered Lord Harrington, the human noble who had first hunted Rachel through the woods of Oakhaven. Treason makes strange bedfellows, does it not? Alaric called out, his voice echoing through the massive cavern, dripping with arrogant certainty. I promised Lord Harrington, the head of the witch who cursed his lands, and in return he provided the silver bolts needed to put down a mad king. Alaric spread his arms, basking in his perceived victory. It is over, Cedric. You are cornered, completely trapped, and outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Relinquish the pup step down from the altar, and I will let the human live. Refuse, and we will fill you both with silver. A lie, Rachel whispered, standing tall. Her fear was gone, replaced by a profound, radiant calm. She slipped her dirt-stained hand into Cedric's, her fingers intertwining with his. Cedric squeezed her fingers, drawing strength from the steady rhythm of her pulse. His golden eyes blazed with an unearthly, lethal light as he looked out at the invading army, then down at the magnificent silver wolf beside them. You bring human weapons into the cradle of our gods, Alaric. Cedric's voice was remarkably calm, yet it carried the crushing weight of an impending avalanche. It vibrated through the stone floor, rattling the armor of the mercenaries. You align with the very men who slaughter our kind for sport, who butcher our children in the valleys, all for a desperate grasp at a throne. Alaric's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before his face contorted in rage. I do what must be done to save the pack from ruin, kill them. A synchronized, terrifying clatter echoed through the cavern as thousands of crossbows were raised and aimed at the altar. The corrupted Lycan warriors dug their claws into the stone, preparing to charge. Rachel did not flinch. She looked down at the creature she had saved from the freezing mud. Sterling, she whispered, her voice carrying the absolute authority of a mother and a bonded protector. Show them. The silver wolf stepped forward, placing himself between Rachel and the army. He planted his massive paws, threw his head back toward the open sky above the caldera, and let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the earth. It wasn't just a sound. It was a physical manifestation of divine wrath. It was the voice of the moon goddess herself. Instantly, the ancient runes lining the caldera ignited, shifting from a soft blue to a blinding, brilliant silver fire. The magic of the first sanctuary, dormant for a millennia, answered the ancient call of the Argentum. A massive dome of impenetrable liquid moonlight slammed down over the altar just as the human mercenaries fired. Thousands of silver bolts struck the barrier and instantly shattered into harmless dust. The backlash of raw, holy magic swept outward like a tidal wave, crashing into the invading army. The human mercenaries shrieked, dropping their weapons as the sheer mind-shattering pressure of a divine presence washed over them. They fell to their knees, weeping in absolute terror as they faced the wrath of a god they had never believed in. But the magic did not harm the Lycans. Instead, it moved through them like a purifying fire, stripping away the dark aggression and manipulation Alaric had poisoned them with. The corrupted wolves of the rebellion whined in confusion, their glowing red eyes fading back to natural hues of gold, brown, and green. The parasitic influence of Alaric's treason burned away in the holy light, leaving them bewildered and submissive. Cedric released Rachel's hand and stepped deliberately through the silver barrier. As he did, the ancient magic clung to him, weaving into his very flesh and blood. He shifted, but not into the familiar black wolf of the Blackwood line. The Alpha King became a titan of primordial shadow and blinding starlight, a creature of terrifying, awe-inspiring beauty that defied mortal comprehension. He didn't need to strike a single blow. He simply turned his massive starlight-infused gaze upon Alaric, the usurper's bravado completely shattered. Alaric fell to his knees, his body trembling violently. He gasped for air, unable to withstand the crushing divine pressure of Cedric's true alpha aura, now magnified 100-fold by the proximity of the Argentum. "You are stripped of your title, Alaric of House Montgomery." Cedric's voice boomed, echoing not just in the cavern, but directly into the minds of every soul present. "You are stripped of your pack, your name, and your blood. You are a ghost." Alaric let out a blood-curdling scream as the spiritual connection to the Blackwood pack was violently, irrevocably severed from his mind, leaving him a broken, solitary rogue. The remaining Lycan army, witnessing the absolute divine right of their king, immediately dropped to their bellies, baring their necks in total zealous submission. Lord Harrington, weeping and crawling backward in the dirt, tried to flee. Cedric's massive starlit shadow fell over him, freezing the human noble in place. "Return to your lands, human." Cedric growled his massive jaws inches from Harrington's face. "Tell your King Edward what you saw here today. Tell him the Treaty of Lancaster is void. The Blackwood pack bows to no human law, and we will no longer hide in the shadows." The battle was over before a single sword had been drawn. Hours later, the amphitheater was calm once more. The army had been reorganized, preparing the long march back to Ironhold, no longer a divided, treacherous force, but a united, zealous legion devoted to their true alpha. Cedric returned to his human form, his skin flushed with the lingering heat of the divine magic. He draped a heavy velvet cloak over his broad shoulders and slowly walked up the stone steps of the altar. Rachel sat on the edge of the stone, her arms wrapped lovingly around the neck of the resting silver wolf. She looked exhausted, battered yet breathtakingly beautiful in the ethereal light. He knelt gracefully before her, ignoring the thousands of eyes watching from below, and took her dirt-stained hands in his calloused ones. "The pack will resist," Cedric said softly, his golden eyes locked intensely on hers, bearing his soul to her. "The elders will say a human cannot sit on the obsidian throne. They will claim it is a violation of the old ways, a blasphemy against our history." Rachel smiled. It was a fierce, resilient, and deeply beautiful expression that made Cedric's heart stop in his chest. "Then we will write new ways," she declared, her voice steady and ringing with quiet power. "With silver and shadow." Cedric bowed his head in absolute devotion, pressing his lips tenderly to her knuckles. "My queen, what a breathtaking, pulse-pounding conclusion to the Lycan King scented a human. From the terrifying frozen depths of the Wormtooth Mountains to the awe-inspiring magic of the first sanctuary, Cedric and Rachel proved that love and destiny can conquer the darkest betrayals. They broke the ancient rules, bridged two warring worlds and unleashed the divine power of the Silver Wolf to claim their rightful thrones. Their journey from mortal enemies to fated soulmates is a testament to the raw, undeniable power of a true bond. If your heart was racing during that epic showdown, or if you swooned when Cedric finally called Rachel his queen, you need to be part of our pack. Hit that like button, share this incredible romance with your friends, and subscribe for more spine-tingling, magical stories. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a tale. Let us know in the comments, what was your favorite twist